fueling business innovation. This is a conversation today where we're kind of picking up on a bit of a theme that's emerging around helping us all think more creatively about the role of innovation in business and how we can bring our teams into that and just be more conscious and intentional about it. And today I have Melissa Dinwiddie joining me, author of The Creative Sandbox Way, also a Juilliard-trained dancer, professional artist for 15 years, jazz singer, songwriter, and performing improviser. So quite the combo there to really, I hope, Melissa, help us come at this from a different angle, bring a bit of freshness to how we even look at innovation in a business context. So thank you, Melissa, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's such a delight to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Like I mentioned, we've had a few different angles. We're always talking about, doing business differently, having a mindset shift around what even is the purpose of business or the role of business. And so innovation, creativity, some of these things have come up I think we're up to episode 92 now of the podcast. And it has come up quite a lot. But I'm interested for you, given your background and experience, to maybe talk to us a little bit about how you discovered the power of play and how that makes work more effective. So tell us some of that story and how these two worlds collide for you.
Well, as you mentioned in your beautiful intro, I did not come from the corporate world. I come from the world of creativity and actually was a professional artist for 15 years. And in that period of time, actually before I was a professional artist, I myself believed that I was a non-creative person as a writer. So I started procrastinating and doing arts and crafts as that was my procrastination device. And that I could do, there was no pressure on it. So I could do that for hours on end, figuring out how to get past my own creative stuckness. And the things that I learned, the tools that I learned for getting past my creative stuckness are I leveraged and turned into a sort of a second business, helping other people get creatively unstuck. I was a professional creativity instigator. Now, this is part of the story because that second career was mostly virtual, but once a year I had virtual coaching, creativity communities, creativity courses. And once a year, I led a retreat, a creativity retreat in person. And part of that was mostly self-directed. People would come and work on their creative projects, and I would lead them through a creative catalyzing session every morning after breakfast, which is basically improv activities to get them out of their heads and into their bodies so that they could do their creative things without the gremlins saying, this is a waste of time. Who do you think you are? You're so stupid. You shouldn't be doing this. You should be working on something important. Whatever the gremlins say that keep us all from doing our creative things. And every year I'd think to myself, these are the same activities that I would be doing if I were a facilitator for a company, for a team of engineers or a team of leaders or any team in the corporate world. And eventually I built up enough courage to pivot. That's how I got to what I'm doing now, working with leaders and teams that need to innovate on a timeline and helping them to create the impossible.
It's so interesting because the little image that comes to my mind is the part in Lego Movie where he's doing business, 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 right? So there's this kind of misconception, I think, that we have that is part of this separating out. I always talk about when I first started the podcast, it was called both and, as in not either or, it's both and. And for me, some of what you just described is that same playing out of when we engage in the world as if things are black and white and it's like, well, my creativity's over here, and if I can, get that happening, then I can make some money over here. Or when I can do my, we separate things out that are actually not separate. And the transition for you into that acknowledgement or realization around the power of play and how it can actually make work more effective, I think, is that piece for us to all stop and go, okay, we're not the little Lego man business, business, business. We have more to us as humans than, these very compartmentalized parts of ourselves. And so I love that story and the combining of those elements. But are there some aspects where you can tell us maybe some stories, whether it was individuals on your retreat or people you've then worked with, of how that liberation or oh, okay, this wasn't just a waste of time or a, procrastination piece in relaxing into and dropping into my body, out of my head, I can now have that new idea or push that new strategy in the business. Can you tell us some of those connections where play did make work more effective?
So the way that I work with companies is I go in and the play is the work. So I don't go in and say, we're going to do a recess so that you can be more effective after the recess, which is important, but that's typically not how I work. Typically how I work is I go in and I do an assessment to figure out what they need. And then I design programs, workshops, experiences that the play itself is actually the delivery mechanism for the work that needs to be accomplished.
Okay. And do you find people can get their heads around that in terms of, because you're right, that's a distinction between the way I had just positioned it, of when you're talking to someone and you say, I'm going to understand that context and then design this in a way where the work you're doing is now formatted in a way that play enables it. Do people understand that, or do they feel like they come into it still thinking, oh, this isn't the real work? Like, how quickly do people understand that?
It does vary. But by the time we've had a conversation together, then they have a clearer sense of what we're talking about. But yes, often it is, people do come with preconceived notions. I often spend a lot of time educating around what it is that I actually do, because play means so many different things to so many people. And I don't lead with play. I lead with, here are the outcomes that I can help you
Yeah, great.
accomplish.
Yes. Which makes sense because you've got to understand where they're coming from. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that if I start with, we're going to do Lego series play together, or we're going to do improv together, or we're going to do whatever together, that can really turn people off, because that's not what they're interested in anyway. They want to solve their problem.
And also they've got their own narrative going, a little bit like you said, where you thought you weren't a creative person. And I've had the same bit where, if someone said, oh, we're now going to do this drawing or do this, then the cringe factor or the, oh my goodness, I don't want to do that. The barriers start to come up already, because they haven't been able to kind of more gently find their way in.
Yes, they might. In fact, when I was just getting started in this realm, shall we say, I made some mistakes in that regard, and tried leading with the modality, leading with Lego Serious Play or whatever the modality might be, and lost some work as a result, because people thought, oh, I'm not interested in a child's toy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're like, oh, I think you missed the point.
They totally missed the point, but I clearly missed the point too, because that was a mistake on my part. And that's not what that wasn't the best way for me to be talking about my
As you've
services.
then made some of those mistakes, navigated, the entry points that work or how you do the education component you spoke of, what have you found are the most effective things that cross over from that world of like artistic principles into being tools that also fuel business innovation?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. I do a lot of work around what I call the 3 C's, which is connection, communication, and creativity. And of those 3 C's, everything I do, connection is baked in. So although yes, people can certainly hire me to help their teams connect better, but everything I do is connection is going to be baked into it regardless. I get hired for a lot of work around communication, helping teams communicate for greater impact and influence. That's the work that I have done at Meta with a lot of research teams there. They, brilliant folks with, lots of advanced degrees, doing amazing work on research and incredible insights that they're finding, but they can't get their insights, the results of their insights are having no impact. They can't get them spread across the organization because they can't communicate them effectively. So I go in and help them, or I have gone in and helped these teams to have more influence, have more impact, so that the results of their insights are actually getting spread around, just because they can communicate them so that people can hear them. They're not fire hosing people. They're better able to empathize with their audiences and understand their audience's context and communicate using analogies that their audience actually understands, instead of using jargon that makes their audience just glaze over. And so many different challenges that these teams are facing coming from the world of academia, and just not able to communicate with people who are not fellow academic researchers.
Yeah. And are there particular, like in that tool belt, if you like, of those artistic principles that you then pull in around connection, communication, community? Because obviously a lot of people would say, oh, we've done this offsite day, or we've had a consultant come in and we've done a communication session or whatever. But the elements that you use, or those principles, I suspect would be quite different. So can you paint us a little picture of what that looks like and what those principles are?
Well, I'll give you an example. This is one of my favorite activities that I like to do. And it will give you an example of the kinds of things that I do. Now, all of the activities are different. Some of them I do in a big group. Some of them I do in pairs or small groups, but they tend to be drawn from the world of improv and theater. And in this particular activity is designed to get people empathizing with their audience and better able to find common ground, and to use analogies to communicate in a way that their audience is actually going to be able to understand them. So I divide people into pairs, and partner A, is from the present time. Everything is normal for them. Partner B is a time traveler from 500 years ago. So before I send them off into their pairs, we do a little brainstorming about what's different. What would have been different for somebody in 1525? How would their life be different from our lives? And so we take a couple minutes and talk about no electricity, no running water. They wouldn't have had cars. They would have gotten around in, horse and buggy, or I don't know what, and their clothes would be different. Women would always have worn big hoop skirts if they're living in, I don't know, England or someplace. Maybe if they're living here, they would be wearing deerskin. Whatever, we talk about all these various different things. No modern medicine, blah, 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 right? We brainstorm a little bit. Then before I send them off, I say, okay, partner A, your cell phone goes off. You are going to have to explain what this device is to your time traveling partner. Now, remember, there is a high likelihood that your partner is going to think you're a witch.
And be scared of everything yeah.
They don't have any understanding of that thing. They're going to think that you're a witch. So you're going to also have to convince them that you are not a witch and that you should not be burned at the stake. And you have to do this in 2 minutes. Now, this is an impossible exercise. It is totally impossible, but go have fun. So they have 2 minutes to go try and explain their cell phone and prevent their partner from thinking they're a witch and condemning them to burn at the stake. So then we come back together and I ask everyone, so how many witches are in the room? And half the hands go up, right? Because nobody can succeed really at this
Yeah, it
exercise.
didn't actually convince. Yeah.
It's kind of impossible. And then we talk about, well, did anybody do anything that was at all effective? And what was it? So time travelers, did any of you have a partner who did something that was effective? What did your partner do? And so we surface up what they did that was effective. Invariably, it is something to do with some kind of an analogy that they shared. They found some kind of
Making
common
something
ground.
in common. Yeah.
Yep. And then we switch roles. So now whoever's now taking the role of sharing, and I changed the scenario somehow in some way. And now the present time partner has a bit of a leg up because now they're thinking, oh my gosh, I have to find some common ground. I have to use an analogy of some sort. And then we do it again. And then we come back to the main room again. And there's a better ratio of witches to non-witches. And we have a very rich discussion. And all these light bulbs are going off over people's heads. Now they go off into the world and they have real discussions with real people, cross-functional teammates, people in their lives outside of work who have very different contexts from theirs. And they're thinking about this activity that they did in this workshop that was crazy. And you're never going to meet somebody from 500 years ago, but you are going to meet somebody who has a different context from your own. And how can you apply this? So that is an example. And by the way, I have had lots of examples of people like Laura from a workshop that I taught, one of the Facebook researchers, who came back the following week and shared that she was having a conversation with a cross-functional teammate and trying to explain something to him. And she was getting really frustrated because he did not understand. And she suddenly realized, oh my God, he's not being a jerk. He's not stupid. Time traveler. He has a different context. He doesn't have the same area of expertise as me. I have to meet him at his level and explain it in a way that he will understand. And she was able to do that. And he got really excited. He understood. He was then able to bring a new insight and share it with her. And, they were off to the races. And she was so excited when she was able to bring that back to the workshop the following week. So that's an example of the kind of thing that I do using play to get people to, build new skills, build new muscles in the realm of communication.
I love that. And it is really actually quite common to have those experiences where you need the extreme case study or the, experience that pushes it beyond what's actually going to happen for it to be like, oh, okay, yes, thank you. That was so not realistic enough that I could put aside well, this wouldn't happen and they wouldn't have, and actually just go through the exercise. But as you said, there's almost the foreignness of it being creative or artistic or from improv, like it being so different to their everyday also helps break down some of those barriers where if it was, let's just do a role play of a communication exercise, it's like, it's almost not far enough away from the everyday to help the lesson kind of really embed. So I like that. I think that's really helpful. The other piece, I suppose, if we stay on that vein around something needing to be foreign enough to us to help us do some of that shifting, like you talked about, out of our head into our body or out of our really well-worn paths of this is how we do things around here. Another aspect that you talk about is helping turn the impossible into reality. And so this aspect of our creative potential that we may not be tapping into that makes us see something as either unrealistic or not possible. What does that actually look like in practice? So you've given us that great example, and Laura then going out and seeing the connection there. But I'm wondering, so if someone's listening or watching to this podcast and they're going, okay, I don't necessarily yet have the opportunity to work directly with Melissa. How could I put that into practice? What does that look like to start to tap into that creative potential and move things out of the space of feeling like they're impossible?
I just always go back to my Create the Impossible framework. And the first step of the framework is play hard. Now, I do not mean by this to go to Vegas and get wild. That's often an association that we hear in the States, oh, play hard, as opposed to work hard, right? No, when I say play hard in reference to the framework, it is really to get into the mind space of being a 4-year-old again. And if you think about being a 4-year-old playing, it's all about exploration. It's all about following your curiosity. It's all about trying things, exploring. So being in that space of exploration and play and not having pressure on what you're doing. So neuroscience shows that when we're in a playful state, our brains actually function differently. And play activates multiple brain networks simultaneously, and it reduces activity in our fear center. So that creates ideal conditions for innovation. So that's the start. So just how can we, and I talk a lot about that in my book, The Creative Sandbox Way, which is all about unblocking creative stock. So getting into that space of just exploration and following curiosity. And then the second step is make crap. And this is where so many people and organizations get stuck because we're so afraid of making mistakes. We're so afraid of looking bad, taking any risk, failing. So what happens? We end up making nothing. But innovation requires experimentation. And most experiments fail. They need to fail in order for us to learn. And I have this saying, we need the crap to fertilize the good stuff. Every failed prototype, every terrible first draft, every bad idea, they're not wastes of time. They're essential stepping stones to breakthrough solutions. So we have to let ourselves suck. We have to let ourselves make crap. That's step 2. And then step 3 is learn fast. And that is about turning every experience, especially the failures, into data. Instead of getting stuck in perfectionism or analysis paralysis, innovative teams create rapid feedback loops that accelerate learning. And what makes this framework so powerful is that these 3 elements reinforce each other. When we play, we're more willing to make crap. And when we make crap without judgment, we learn faster. And when we learn faster, we discover unexpected play opportunities. And it is a continuous cycle. So play hard, make crap, learn fast. And that helps us play harder, make more crap, learn fast, and so on and so on. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah. And the freedom in that, I think, to, as you said, all of the research and evidence shows that actually as you relax, you're more likely to have access to all of these things that we apparently, in terms of the jargon out there, everyone's talking about wanting to be innovative and to stand out in a market and all of this language. And yet, if we go back to that silly little example I gave at the beginning of the, Lego movie with the business, when we're so strict and when we're clocking people, their productivity based on were you sitting at your desk or can I track your computer mouse screen to check you're working, these very limited ideas of what means someone is working hard or is being productive actually are the opposite of what's needed in terms of the way we work. if we want to have the outcomes we're saying we want. So
Yeah.
it's the breakdown there of being willing to, in the same way that you talked about the aspects of, exploration and curiosity, it's for us as leaders to be brave enough to kind of go, this might feel scary and risky because, oh my goodness, this is the opposite of what I've been told I should do. And maybe that's where, again, if you talk about that beautiful cycle you talked about, that we don't need to go from 0 to 100 in one hit, but like, how do we create some little containers or in your sandbox that we can play in that feels safer at first while we get that confidence and learn how this actually works.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so so much about starting tiny, the little tiny increments. When I talk in my book about ridiculously achievable commitment goals, and um you know uh, one of my creative sandbox guideposts is just start anywhere. That's guidepost number 5. And really, like, the tiniest little increments, we have to get past that starting friction anytime we're starting any kind of creative endeavor at all, whether it's for work or outside of work. Just, yeah, just the tiniest little starting and continuing. That is what is going to end up creating those innovations, those creative projects. Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. I was saying to someone yesterday that in this same vein, often that piece that stops us from doing something or taking that first step is this weird overlap where people will often talk about that they either are having some self doubt or there's some fear that they'll look silly or people will judge them, all of these different things. And I'm always a bit cheeky with that. And so, like yesterday in this conversation, I said, it's interesting that it's being framed, like not doing it is being framed around some fear or insecurity. And yet, to be so convinced that everyone is thinking about you that much and paying attention is actually this weird inflation of ego in that like, I think you're actually making yourself more important than you really are. Like, people are so absorbed in their own lives. I don't think they're really sitting there going, "Ooh, let me obsess over all the mistakes Bessie's making in, trying this new thing." It's like, they really don't care, And so sometimes those things are a good reminder too of like, you're making it this big thing of like, well, if I start and I'm not as good as that vision I have in my mind of what I want to be, like when I've mastered this skill, I'll be written off or I'll look like I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's like, really, people aren't that obsessed with you. So it's okay. The other thing that kind of came to my mind when you were describing those play hard, make crap, learn fast was that I don't know whether you've seen there was a podcast that Tim Ferriss did with Brandon Sanderson recently. So, like, as these long form ones always are, I love it, but they're like, more than 3 hours long. But Sanderson was talking about in that and talking about the way that they create the worlds for their books that they write. They said you have to shift out of seeing the book as the work of art and see yourself, the writer, as the work of art. And so nothing's a waste. So it's that it's not this pressure of this book needs to be amazing. It's like, I'm learning the skills as a writer, and everything, even if it's, 5 books that go nowhere, they're not a waste. That 6th book has come about because I, as the piece of art, have evolved and learnt the skill. And I think sometimes, like you've given us today, it's finding, because for each of us a different tool will work, but it's finding something where you go, oh, that resonates with me. I can use that to be brave enough to step into it. So any of those tools that Melissa's just shared might kind of land for you, but there is really, I think, that end game is the desire to find the freedom to kind of, let go of all those things that were stopping you and just start, as you said.
Yeah, I love that idea of you being the piece of art that what it makes me think of is there's an artist now. I'm spacing on her name, but I'm sure she's not the only one who says this, but I picked up a phrase from her that nothing is ever wasted. Often the first several paragraphs end up either being scrapped entirely, or they end up being moved down to, it's the second page gets pulled up to become the first section. So, but I had to write those first several paragraphs in order to get to what would eventually become the opening. So if I sat there and went, oh, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, which is what I did back in the 90s when I was trying to be a writer, and told myself, well, I just suck as a writer, so therefore I should just not write, which was, the story that I bought into in my head, which ended up, I ended up falling backwards into a career as an artist, but I just needed to keep writing. The truth is that people become writers by writing, and people become good writers by writing a lot.
Yeah. And the same with your examples before, become good communicators by communicating, like have the conversation. It's like the practice, the iteration, the repetition.
Yes, and nothing is ever wasted. Nothing is ever wasted. All of those, what I liken it to, if you have ever turned on a rusty faucet, you turn on the faucet and all this like rusty, gunky brown water comes out. How do you get to the clear water? You don't turn it off. You let it flow. And that is how we get to the good stuff that we're trying to generate with our creative efforts. We let it flow. Turn on that faucet, turn on that rusty faucet and let it flow. Nothing is ever wasted.
I think too, there's an element in what you're saying that is helpful to be a bit more gentle and give ourselves grace in the learning process, because a little bit like you gave the example before around the exercise with the time traveler from 500 years ago, and using that to say, okay, they're coming at this from a different place. There's things that are foreign to them that I had assumed were shared understanding. Like, what is it that I need to communicate? How do I have that empathy? I think some of what you've just described is actually us then having that empathy and consideration for ourselves as we learn these skills, because that first paragraph or the piece you described that, that we first get out on the paper, the reality is that's because we're starting from where we're at, right? So it's not the finished product yet, but our brain is already thinking about what really should be step 5 if we had taken the audience into account. But starting where we are is allowing us to be a human as well and say, well, I am where I am and I've got the last 25 years of experience in my mind. So let's just get that down. But it's allowing them these things to have the space, I suppose, to then pause and go, okay, just because I wrote that first doesn't mean the sequence is it will be first, in the process of then, massaging it round and understanding who it's for and what's missing, and taking those other experiments and tools into account that you've talked us through. I can now go, if I think of the actual audience for this, they don't yet know these 3 things. I need to set up paragraph 1, right? But I like that what you've described is helpful for us as the individual business leader or the manager trying to communicate this thing, that it's like you also don't have to keep beating yourself up going, oh my goodness, I have to start with where they are. You may not be able to begin in that way.
Yeah, and I really love that you mentioned the self-compassion piece, because that is something that is so important to me. I have kind of discovered self-compassion just in the past, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to do math quickly, which is not a strength of mine.
Don't worry, just make it up. We
But
don't know anyway.
10 years, the past 10
Yes,
years, like
great. Yeah.
say, and it's changed my life. And
Yeah.
so much so that I have a golden formula, which is self-awareness plus self-compassion equals the key to everything good.
And the thing is that the combining those things from when we look at it from, say, a leadership perspective, it's what we will actually then be able to sustain, because similar to you, for me, a whole bunch of both my own practice and experience as a leader, but then what I was taught either academically or by mentors or others, what I kind of have realized, similar to you, like as I've got older and I've gone, okay, that worked in that certain phase, or that worked when I had that kind of energy of someone in their 20s or their 30s. But actually, long term, I don't want to live like that. And I think you and I are both on the same page around this commitment to, okay, if we're actually going to be equipping leaders or teams to operate in a certain way, we're not just about what a lot of consultants and advisors are, which is like, oh, what's the return on investment? How are we getting, higher quarterly numbers? But it's actually saying there's a care and concern in what we're actually creating here that is for the people in the mix. And particularly, for myself in my work, and I'm guessing there's a component in your work, for the leaders that are so instrumental in then what everyone else's experience is of working in that team or that organization. So I'm wondering, are there any elements either related to your book or your work that when you think about those of us that are listening to you right now, myself included, who are leaders of an established organization that's in that small to medium size, so not large listed companies, but those of us kind of pulling the strings directly with our teams and our organizations, are there things we haven't covered that you want to leave us with to really come back to this idea of fueling business innovation and marrying those worlds up of play and our creative side?
So when I go into organizations, I'm typically there bringing a program over a long period of time, ideally, because of course, changing behaviors is not something that happens overnight, right? But when you're working with a team, there are ways that you can bring play into your workflow, make things feel more creative and fun, without it feeling forced, and make it feel really relevant to your team's workflow. So here's some small, easy ways to begin. One thing that you could do is you can start meetings with a quick, playful check-in. So instead of like, how is everyone today, which might be pretty common, you could do something really unexpected, like, if your mood was a weather pattern, how would it be right now? Which is just gets people thinking differently. And it doesn't take any more time than your usual check-in, but it gets people, it's sort of a little spark of delight that gets people thinking differently.
And might help them on that empathy aspect of suddenly seeing or understanding a colleague better. So if someone says, I'm a tornado or something, then you go, okay, that actually explains that I've been finding you exhausting today because you're a bit intense. Or, so it kind of, by being more expressive in the imagery they bring to how they are feeling, or it can actually help that. Some of those pieces you talked about before of connection, communication, community.
There's also something about doing a playful check-in like that uses an analogy, a visual analogy like that has a way of giving people a little more space to say something a little more descriptive and authentic about how they feel, rather than how is everybody today, has a tendency to get people to say, I'm fine.
Or to feel very vulnerable and exposed if they said, I'm actually feeling a bit scattered and unfocused. Whereas if it's not me, it's the weather pattern that's that. It's like there's a separation and safety.
Exactly. Yes. And there's a way in which if you say it's a weather pattern and I'm cloudy with a bit of showers or something like that, then you're not completely identifying how what's happening. There creates a little bit of mystery. So that's an example of having a quick playful check-in, and you can create some variations of that on that theme. So that's one way to just create a playful check-in. Another one is to use, if you're familiar with improv, then you've probably heard of the concept of yes and thinking. Doesn't mean agreement. It means to accept an offer and build on it, to validate ideas and build on them. So to use that technique from the world of improv. So when somebody shares an idea, practice building on it.
And do you set that up? Like, so say it's, I'm running a meeting, is the way that you set that up, you say, what we're going to do is, as we think about this next project, I want you to, any idea someone throws into the mix, we're building on it with yes and. Like, do you just frame explicitly to the group that that's what we're doing?
Yes, and so I would say yes, do that. And so I would say as a leader, or as anybody who's listening, as a leader, practice it on your own, just without even telling anyone. Practice this and see how that changes for you internally, and see what you notice in other people's responses as you practice responding to other people using yes and. What happens? How does it? This is an experiment that when I lead programs with, teams at Facebook or teams at whatever other company, this is, I ask people at the end of, I have workshops that extend over several sessions, and I have them run an experiment between one session and the next. So they have like a week or 2 weeks in between sessions, and they have an assignment to run an experiment between session 1 and session 2, and between session 2 and session 3, etc. And then they have to report back on how those experiments went. And this might be an example of an experiment. I tried yes anding every time anyone brought an idea to me, including my kids or whatever it might be, right?
Nice. Okay, so that's a really good way of doing also the piece of the incremental practicing and learning of the thing. So you're not having to jump straight into also helping your team learn a new skill when you haven't played with it yourself. So that's a nice kind of entry point.
Yeah. So practice it yourself. And also you could practice, you could try bringing it as an activity to play with your team. We're going to play with this yes and technique from improv. Sometimes I start with yes, but sometimes I start with yes and. The point is to compare and contrast. What happens? What is the experience? Exactly. What's your internal feeling like? How does it feel to be yes butted versus to be yes anded? How does it feel to yes but somebody versus to yes and somebody? What kind of party did you get to? What was that party like?
And even maybe doing the observing your own approach. So if you go in knowing that you're doing the yes, but, I would guess that you are then aware of the fact that, like, oh, even while they're talking, I'm not 100% listening because I need to be thinking about my idea of what, like, which is different to having that more open piece of listen, absorb their idea and build on it actually changes how you're listening, thinking, and what you're focused on.
Totally. It's just a very, very different mind space to be in. Yeah.
That's so helpful. Thank you. That's really great. I love kind of closing out the conversation with some of those practical pieces that any of us could actually just implement today, which is great. And Melissa, we're going to cut it off there because otherwise I'll chat to you all day. But if people would love to connect with you, read some more, learn some more, what is the best place for them to go to? We'll then share some links and things in the show notes, but where would you like people to head?
Yeah, the best place to find me is at my website, melissadinwiddie.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Melissa Dinwiddie over there. And on LinkedIn, you can find my LinkedIn learning courses. I have one brand new one that just came out called How to Overcome and Avoid Creative Blocks, which, yeah, just landed. I also wanted to let you know that I just created for your listeners a special link. You can find it at that QR code, and I have a link for you if people go there, then you can download the first 50 pages of my book for free.
Perfect. Great. So we'll pop that link in as well. Again, just start, get those first 50 pages, have a read, and then you can grab the book. I love that. Thank you so much. And I really hope that this has been helpful, sparked a few ideas. And again, like anything, it doesn't make a difference if you just keep it as an interesting podcast you listen to or watch. Actually, put some of this into practice in the way that you're leading your businesses. And we really do hope that it can fuel some of that innovation and new ways of operating. Thank you all.